I told a lie to save my career, and somehow ended up married to the CEO. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the suffocating pressure of 1,000 eyes. I was standing in a dress that cost 3 months of my rent, clutching a champagne glass so hard I thought it might shatter. This was supposed to be a simple corporate gala, a night to celebrate Vane International's latest merger. But for me, it was a firing squad. My boss, a woman who valued traditional family values above actual job performance, was making her way toward me with a predatory smile. "Clara, dear, I was just telling the board how much we value your stability," she said, her eyes scanning my ringless left hand. "But I heard a rumor that you were struggling with the long hours, that perhaps a single woman like yourself doesn't have the anchor needed for the senior partner track." The panic hit me like a physical blow. I needed this promotion. My sister's medical bills were piling up, and if I lost this job, we lost everything. Before I could think, before my brain could process the magnitude of the mistake I was about to make, the lie slipped out. "Actually, I'm not struggling at all. In fact, I'm engaged. We just haven't made it public yet." The silence that followed was deafening. My boss's eyebrows shot up. Engaged? To whom? I looked around the room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. And then I saw him, Julian Vane, the CEO, the man who fired people for being 5 minutes late, the man who looked like he was carved out of ice and dressed in a $3,000 tuxedo. He was standing 10 feet away, watching the exchange with a cold, detached interest. "To Julian," I blurted out, "Julian Vane." The room seemed to tilt. My boss gasped, her face turning a shade of pale that matched the tablecloths. Julian didn't move. He didn't blink. He just set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray and walked toward us. I was ready to be escorted out by security. I was ready to be humiliated. But as he reached me, he didn't call for the police. Instead, he slid a heavy, warm arm around my waist and pulled me flush against his side. "I told you we couldn't keep it a secret forever, darling," he whispered, his voice a deep, vibrating rumble that sent a shiver straight down my spine. The lie was born and the trap was set. 10 minutes later, I was in the back of Julian's private limousine, the city lights blurring past the window in a smear of neon. The silence inside the car was heavy, jagged with the realization of what I had just done. Julian sat opposite me, his legs crossed, looking perfectly composed while I felt like I was vibrating out of my skin. He hadn't said a word since we left the gala. He just watched me with those slate-gray eyes that seemed to see right through my emerald silk dress and into the messy, desperate reality of my life. "Why," I finally whispered, the word barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Why did you play along? You could have destroyed me right there." Julian leaned forward, the shadows of the city dancing across his sharp features. "Because, Clara, you aren't the only one in that room who needed a lie. My board is breathing down my neck about my image. They think I'm too detached, too robotic. They want a human element, a wife, a story." He pulled a slim leather folder from the seat beside him. "You provided the story. Now you're going to provide the wife." He handed me a document. It was a contract, typed in cold, professional font. 1 year of marriage, a shared penthouse, public appearances, no scandals, and most importantly, no catching feelings. At the end of the year, I would receive a bonus that would pay off my sister's debt 10 times over. I would also get my promotion. All I had to do was live a lie with the most intimidating man in the country. "This is insane," I said, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. "We don't even like each other, Julian. You barely know my last name." "I know enough," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. "I know you're desperate, and I know you're a good actress. You didn't hesitate for a second when you threw my name out there." He leaned back into the shadows, his face obscured. "Sign it, Clara. Save your job, save your sister, or walk out of this car and lose it all. The choice is yours, but the clock is ticking." I looked at the pen he offered, a heavy gold thing that felt like a weapon. I thought of my sister's face, and then I thought of the way Julian's arm had felt around my waist, solid, protective, and terrifyingly warm. I signed. The transition was swifter than I imagined. Within 48 hours, my life was packed into boxes and moved into Julian's penthouse. It was a glass and steel fortress overlooking Central Park, a place that felt more like a gallery than a home. Everything was white, gray, or black. There were no photos on the walls, no clutter on the counters. It was as cold as the man who owned it. "Your room is at the end of the hall," Julian said, not looking up from his tablet as I stood in the foyer with my suitcase. "My staff has already stocked your closet with clothes suitable for a Mrs. Vane. We have a dinner with the board of directors tomorrow night. You will memorize the How We Met story I've prepared for you. It's in the blue folder on your nightstand." I felt like a bird that had been traded from one cage to another. I spent the first night wandering the halls, my footsteps echoing on the marble. I found myself in the kitchen at 3:00 a.m. looking for a glass of water when I ran into him. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city. He was wearing a silk robe, his chest partially bare, and for the first time he didn't look like a CEO. He looked tired. He looked lonely. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "It's too quiet here," I admitted, leaning against the cold granite island. "Back home, I can hear the neighbors arguing and the sirens on the street. Here, it's like the world doesn't exist." "That's the point of this hike, Clara, to get away from the world." He turned to look at me, and for a second the mask slipped. I saw a flash of something in his eyes, a hunger, a sadness, that made my breath hitch. He stepped toward me, the scent of expensive bourbon and cedarwood filling my senses. "Tomorrow, the world will be watching us. They'll be looking for a crack in the foundation. Are you ready to be Mrs. Vane?" "I don't know," I whispered. He reached out, his thumb grazing my lower lip, a touch so light it could have been a hallucination. My heart hammered against my ribs, a warning I wasn't ready to heed. "You're a quick study," he murmured. "Just remember, Clara, it's all an act." He turned and walked away, leaving me in the dark kitchen with a thirst that water couldn't fix. The board dinner was a gauntlet of filtered smiles and sharp questions. I sat at Julian's side, my hand resting on his arm as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I told the story of our whirlwind romance with a conviction that surprised even me. I talked about our shared love for obscure art and late-night walks, things Julian and I had never actually done. But as I spoke, I felt Julian's hand cover mine. He squeezed my fingers, and when I looked at him, he was smiling, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. For a moment, I forgot the contract. I forgot the sister. I forgot the lie. "They bought it," Julian said later that night as we stood in the foyer of the penthouse. He was unknotting his tie, his movements slow and deliberate. "The chairman actually told me he'd never seen me so, animated. You were perfect, Clara." "It felt real," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I was exhausted, the adrenaline of the evening finally fatting and leaving a raw, aching vulnerability in its place. "For a second there, when you were looking at me, I actually believed you loved me." The air in the foyer changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian stopped moving, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked at me, his gaze intense, searching. "Belief is a dangerous thing, Clara. It leads to expectations, and expectations lead to disappointment." "Is that why you're so cold?" I asked, stepping closer. I was tired of the masks. I was tired of the act. "Because you're afraid of being disappointed." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I'm not afraid of anything. I'm just realistic. Love is a chemical reaction designed to ensure the survival of the species. It has no place in a business arrangement." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" I challenged. I was standing inches from him now, the heat from his body radiating through my dress. "Why did you touch me in the car? Why did you come to the kitchen last night?" He didn't answer with words. He grabbed my waist and pulled me into him, his mouth crashing onto mine in a kiss that was anything but a business arrangement. It was desperate, angry, and filled with a longing that shook me to my core. We weren't acting anymore. The rules were gone, and the storm had finally broken. We made love that night with a ferocity that felt like a confession, a deep, soul-shattering connection that made the fake marriage feel like the only real thing in my life. But as I fell asleep in his arms, the weight of the lie felt heavier than ever. We had broken the only rule that mattered. We had caught feelings. Sunlight hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse like a spotlight, waking me up to a reality I wasn't prepared for. I was tangled in silk sheets that smelled of Julian, expensive soap and something deeper, something primal. He wasn't in bed, but the indentation on the pillow next to me was still warm. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. We had crossed the line. The contract was still in the drawer, but the boundaries it set were now nothing but smoke. I found him in the dining room, fully dressed in a charcoal suit, looking like the untouchable CEO again. He was drinking black coffee and staring at his phone. The intimacy of the night before felt like a dream until he looked up. His eyes didn't have their usual icy sheen. They were dark, focused, and dare I say, possessive. "We need to talk about what happened," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast room. "What happened was a lapse in judgment," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He set the phone down. "But it doesn't change the timeline. The board is still watching. My family's annual estate retreat is this weekend. My mother, she's suspicious. She's been asking about your background, your family." "My family?" I froze. My sister, Sarah, was in a public ward, struggling with a chronic illness. If Julian's elite family found out I was a charity case who lied to keep a job, they'd tear me apart. "Julian, if they find out about the lie, it won't just be my job. It'll be your reputation." He walked over to me, stopping just inches away. He reached out, tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was electric, making me forget the danger for a split second. "They won't find out, because as of this morning, the bonus in your contract has been doubled. We just have to make it through the weekend. Stay close to me, Clara. Don't let them see you sweat." He kissed my forehead, a gesture that felt far too tender for a man who claimed love was just a chemical reaction. The Vane family estate was a sprawling Gothic mansion in the countryside, surrounded by mist and old money. As we pulled up the long driveway, I felt Julian's hand grip mine. It wasn't for show this time. His knuckles were white. "My mother, Elinor, is the one you have to worry about," he whispered as the chauffeur opened the door. "She sees everything. Just keep the story straight. We met at the gallery. It was love at first sight. You're from a quiet family in the suburbs. That's all she needs to know." The weekend was a nightmare of polo matches and silent dinners. Elinor Vane was a woman made of diamonds and vinegar. She watched me eat, watched me walk, and most of all, she watched how I looked at her son. On the second night, she caught me alone in the library. "You're very pretty, Clara," she said, her voice like silk over a blade. "But Julian has never been a man of impulse. He's a man of strategy, so I find myself wondering, what is the strategy here? You don't come from money. You don't have a legacy. What are you hiding?" "I'm not hiding anything," I lied, my throat tightening. "I love him." "Do you?" She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Because I just received a very interesting phone call from a friend at the hospital. It seems a woman matching your description has been visiting a patient in the oncology ward, a patient whose bills are suddenly being paid by an anonymous trust. Julian's trust." My heart stopped. The secret was out. Elinor didn't just suspect a lie. She had the receipts. "I want you gone by Monday," Elinor said, her voice cold and final. "If you don't leave him and tell the board the engagement was a mistake, I will leak the story to the press. CEO's fiancé is a fraud. It will destroy the merger, and it will destroy Julian's position as chairman." I stumbled out of the library, my head spinning. I found Julian on the terrace, looking out at the dark woods. I told him everything, the hospital, his mother, the blackmail. I expected him to be angry. I expected him to call his lawyers and end the contract right then and there. Instead, he turned to me, his face a mask of cold fury, but it wasn't directed at me. "She went behind my back," he hissed. "She thinks she can control me by threatening you." "Julian, she's right," I sobbed. "I'm a liability. I lied to save myself. And now I'm dragging you down with me. We have to end this. I'll quit my job. I'll find another way to pay for Sarah." "No," Julian said, grabbing my shoulders. "You aren't going anywhere. I've spent my whole life doing what was strategic for this family. I've lived in a house of ice because that's what a Vane does." He pulled me into a fierce embrace. "But when I saw you in that ballroom and when I held you last night, I felt something I haven't felt in 30 years. I felt alive. I'm not letting that go for a merger." Monday morning arrived like a funeral. We drove back to the city in total silence. Julian was on his phone the entire time, barking orders at his legal team. I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to find a way to silence his mother and save the merger at the same time. But I knew a leaner vein. She wouldn't be silenced. When we reached the penthouse, the news was already breaking. A tabloid had posted a headline, "The billion-dollar bluff. Is Vane's bride a broke fraud?" My phone was blowing up with calls from my boss. I was being placed on administrative leave effective immediately. My life was crumbling in real time. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the city through the glass, feeling like the world's biggest fool. I had tried to save my job with a lie, and now I had lost my job, my reputation, and the man I was stupid enough to fall for. Julian walked into the room, his face pale. "The board is calling an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They want a statement. They want to see the marriage license, Clara." "We don't have one," I whispered. "Not yet," he said, pulling a velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring that looked like a star fallen from the sky. "We go to the courthouse now. We make it legal. If we're married, the fraud story loses its teeth. We can say the anonymous trust was just a husband taking care of his family. We turn the lie into the truth." "Julian, you can't marry me just to win a corporate war," I said, tears blurring my vision. "I'm not doing it for the corporation," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "I'm doing it because I can't imagine this penthouse without you in it. I don't want a contract, Clara. I want a life. Will you stay, truly stay?" We didn't go to the courthouse. Not yet. Julian realized that if we kept lying, we'd never be free. He called a press conference at the Vane International headquarters. Every major news outlet was there. My boss was there, looking smug. Alina was there in the front row, waiting for my public execution. Julian stood at the podium, his hand firmly interlaced with mine. He didn't read from a script. "A story came out today about my fiancé," Julian began, his voice echoing through the hall. "It claimed she is a fraud. It claims she lied about her status to stay at this company." He paused, looking directly at his mother. "The truth is, Clara did lie. She lied because she lives in a world where a woman's worth is judged by her marital status rather than her merit. She lied because she was desperate to save her sister's life." A murmur ran through the crowd. I felt like I was standing naked in front of the world. "But the biggest lie," Julian continued, his grip on my hand tightening, "was mine. I told myself I could hire a woman to play a part and not lose my heart to her. I thought I could control love like a business deal. I was wrong. Clara is the best thing that ever happened to this company, and she is the best thing that ever happened to me. If her status is an issue for this board, then you can have my resignation along with hers." The room went silent. Alina looked like she'd been slapped. Julian leaned in and kissed me, not a PR kiss, but a slow, deep, "I don't care who's watching" kiss. 6 months later. The merger went through, mostly because the public absolutely loved the romance of the century story. The board couldn't fire Julian. He was more popular than ever. As for my boss, she was retired after an HR investigation into her discriminatory promotion practices. I wasn't a senior partner anymore. I had started my own consulting firm, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. Sarah was in remission, living in a beautiful house in the suburbs that Julian had bought for her, not as a charity case, but as his sister-in-law. We were back at the penthouse, but it didn't look like a museum anymore. There were photos of us on the walls. There was a messy pile of books on the coffee table. The contract had been framed and hung in Julian's office as a reminder of how lucky we were to be such terrible liars. Julian came up behind me as I watched the sunset, wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. "You're thinking about that night at the gala, aren't you?" he teased. "I was thinking about how much of a mess I was," I laughed, leaning back into him. "I told a lie to save my job, Julian. I was so terrified." "Best mistake you ever made," he murmured, turning me around to face him. He looked at me with a warmth that still made my knees weak. No more ice, no more gray, just him. "You saved my life, Clara. I was a robot in a suit until you walked in and lied to my face." "I love you, Mr. Vane," I said. "I love you more, Mrs. Vane," he replied, and as he leaned down to kiss me, I knew that the ending wasn't just satisfying, it was real. We had started with a lie, but we had ended with the only truth that ever mattered.